already been introduced, so I think we can move forward. I would like to say, though, if anyone would like to join our task group, we're looking at research and findings related to adaptive learning, and we're going to try to organize a pilot for next year. Please let me know, and we'll add you to the group. But thank you. We can move on. Thank you.
All right. I got a warning message saying my internet connection was unstable. So you'll have to let me know if I'm coming
You're still coming through okay.
Okay, great. All right, welcome everyone. I want to share kind of what I've been doing over the last 5 years with Waymaker platform and how it has really helped my students in performance in my statistics courses, both STEM and non-STEM. But I'd like to give some background work or some ideas as well. Oh boy, there we go. So the first thing is just Waymaker is one of those things that has Creative Commonly licensed. And so why all the interest of OERs, I'm going to go through these slides pretty quickly, but at least you'll have them in the PowerPoint so that if you ever had questions on this. One of the reasons I converted over to OER was the increase in textbook costs seemed to outpace what it should have. So in other words, I was using a lot of textbooks and online homework interfaces through the publishers, and they seem to have priced themselves out of what I would have considered reasonable pricing. Had they not done that, I probably wouldn't have converted over initially. However, as a secondary thing, and it probably was somewhat serendipitous, was that because they were pricing themselves out, I had the opportunity to look at this statistics course in Waymaker, and it was far better than any textbook that I had reviewed. And I had just gone through a review of about 3 textbooks in 5 years trying to find the perfect one. And this is, and I have to warn you, it's not a textbook. So anyway, you've probably seen charts like this. So one of the things that with OER that is a little different with Waymaker is that if I were to print a PDF of this book, if you will, and I loosely call it a book, it would probably not serve the interest of the students at all. This is not a PDF. It's not simply a conversion over to another textbook. This is a little change in how we're going to use technology to help with analytics, learning analytics, to see how students are performing. And so that's kind of the main difference. And so instead of taking a textbook and just replacing it with another one, this environment goes much further. All right, so a couple research items here. So this was published, and one of the key things down here in the bottom here, right in the abstract, says, research examining whether OER provides learning benefits have produced mixed results, with most studies showing null effects. So in other words, you make a swap over, students would still have access to the book, but they're really not showing an improvement in their student outcomes or their learning. So another thing that bodes well on this, or I mean, follows up with that train of thought is, and I'm sorry to read to you all of this, but I'll try to be very brief. It says, if students engage with the book in ineffective ways, then access will be an irrelevant factor. To this end, we simply caution readers that while access is an important step towards improving learning, it is not sufficient. So how do we go beyond access and really help students engage in materials in effective ways? And this is called the doer effect. And this was published, oh my gosh, I don't know the year, but you can see all the information here. And the piece from this article that came about was, in this study of 12,500 students taking 4 different courses, that the learning effect of doing is about 6 times greater than that of reading. So what Waymaker really does is try to embed opportunities to answer questions within the reading. And I'm going to show that as we dive into Waymaker. So how do you shift from a textbook from reading to doing? You try to create interactive activities inside the reading to try and keep them focused. And you know, I try to, when I teach this in my seated courses, and I ask students about reading textbooks or reading books, and inevitably money will say, I've never read a textbook in my life, or I don't know how to read a textbook. Some will actually admit that. Or, you know, how does a book actually help you? And one of the things that's really common is you'll read a page, a static page, and by the time you get to the bottom of the page, you have no idea what you just read because your brain wandered. With Waymaker, they try to prevent that by offering chunks of information followed by interactive questions to try and reel you back in to the topic at hand. All right, so Waymaker, let me just explain what this is. It can sit inside of your Blackboard course or in Cadella. It can also stand on the internet, so you can actually have access to the stats course without having to do anything. It's freely available on the internet, but you won't have the analytics involved, obviously, because you won't have a class list of students that you can go back to. But it is freely available out there in that format. In New York State, we are under a SUNY OER grant that is in its third year. It was renewed for its third year, I should say, and they've given $4 million to SUNY and $4 million to CUNY to promote the growth of OERs. And what we're using some of that grant money for, I'm also on the SUNY OER committee, is to really help offset the small fee that would be involved in hosting this. Now, let me just say right up front, at first when I was using all these open education resources, I was really pleased that I was having no cost for my students. But then I had to swallow this reality pill that someone has to pay for the server, someone has to pay for the tech support. And so what some companies have done is they've actually offered access and support for nearly $25 per student, which is far less than what the publishers were charging. At first, I was really offended that they would charge for this, but then someone made the comment that OER is free, but it's free like a puppy. Initially, it's great to have the puppy, but then you got to take care of it. And so that's what's happening with SUNY OER and the grant, is that they're actually offsetting that per student fee for the next few years. And they're hoping that it's a 5-year cycle in terms of what they can offer. Our institution has already pledged here at SUNY Erie to actually cover that cost even when the SUNY grant runs out, that they would do it through some other fee structure, and I should say we are not allowed to raise fees. So what they're thinking of doing is just swapping funds from one account to another to try and cover those costs so that the students wouldn't see any increase in price. All right, so what is Waymaker? So it was developed, oh my gosh, I think it was 2013. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation gave some funding to help this to be developed. I first came across the Waymaker platform basically on the OLI, the Open Learning Initiative, through the Carnegie. And I started using it in fall of 2013. Since the materials are Creative Commons licensed, Lumen Learning has extracted those materials and put it into a different environment that now can be embedded within Blackboard. So prior to me using it, I had to have students go off to an external site. Now it's seamless. For those of you stats teachers on the phone, you'll notice that this is not a probability distribution because it doesn't add up to 100%. And it took me a moment to figure out where these percentages came from. So the 34% in the control. So what they're looking at is, how is Waymaker helping students succeed? And one of the things they looked at, it was of the original population that signed up for these courses, that under the control group, using traditional books or traditional OERs or whatever versus Waymaker, you had a 34% drop rate versus 10%. The withdrawal rate was 9% of that original population, or 10% under Waymaker. Now, as you can easily see, the 92 and 91% in the next line just adds up way more than 100. So of the students remaining in the course, so after you take out the drops and the withdrawals, 92% and 91% went on to get a C or better. But even though those numbers are the same, the number of students that this is referencing went up quite a bit. So if you look at the throughput number at the bottom, which is highly important, Waymaker helped retention rates in those courses, if you will, for a C or higher, of 73% of the original population versus 55% for the control group. So it does show that there's some improved throughput and retention in those courses. The other thing that came about was this Pell, the Pell eligible or the Pell grant penalty, if you want to call it. And basically what it shows is students who are eligible for Pell typically have a lower GPA than those students who did not need to access Pell. And we know the lurking variables behind that have to do with economics and home life and whatever. But using Waymaker has actually eliminated that Pell penalty, if you will, from a 2.33, basically a third of a letter grade, has now increased close to those who are non-Pell eligible. All right, so that's just some background there. This is probably one of the more exciting things about Waymaker that I was kind of blown away. I didn't know they were doing this until a couple of years ago. And maybe the OLI, because I've only been using Waymaker through my Blackboard course for 2 years, but through the OLI, I wasn't sure they were doing this. But now when Lumen took this over, they have been doing improvements to the course. So here's an example they use a lot in their presentations about an economics course. And what they had was they have the embedded questions that are their formative assessments that are within the within the reading. And so what you end up having here is this before example was basically just a static graph, and it's trying to show them with arrows, what happens if you, and I'm not a economist, so I don't know all the ins and outs here about supply and demand curves. However, they found out that this was like the #1 question that students or the #1 concept that students just were not getting. So they went back into the course in Waymaker, and they put some people on this, some college professors that they asked for help, and they said, can we make this more interactive so that our students can have will show better performance on this? And so they rewrote the question, and they found out that the students actually did far better on this topic afterwards. So what are they doing with statistics? All right, so this is the Learning Challenges leaderboard, which maybe is a misnomer because it's the leaderboard for the concepts that students get wrong most often in the reading, if asked conceptual questions on. And if you teach statistics, you're pretty familiar with the difficulty of the first two. Basically reading a study or determining the goal. These are the higher level questions that are very challenging for our students. But if you look at the Z-score here that represents where they are in terms of the average student, they're negative, but they're not even 1 standard deviation away. But these are the highest viewed content in the course. So if you take both together, and I did the math here this morning just to see how they got this rise distance, and it's based on this graph. I did tell them they need to make this an ellipse or a circle because the straight lines are closer to the origin at the diagonals. So they may be redoing this graphic. But what they looked at was the average score on the assignment and the average views of the aligned concepts. So they determined then the distance from the origin for each one of these points. And they tried to identify points that was furthest away, and that's how they got their top 5 list. Needless to say, these are some of the most challenging topics in statistics. So they're trying to come up with better ways to rewrite the course as the students, as they have more data from students who are taking the courses. And my students, when they go into the course, the first thing they have to read in the first week of class is they either sign permission that they are allowed to use to collect the data, or they don't. It's up to the student. It's an individual choice. And if they do sign it, then this is data that's collected by Lumen to try and figure out this top 5 list and try to help students, or try to help the curriculum or the learning concepts be better written, or to make it more understandable for our students. And I think this is phenomenal in its own sense. Just think about a book that rewrites itself. Okay, a book, it's an online environment, but it rewrites itself every year based on the student challenges. And the student, I don't think static textbooks will ever do this. So this is actually quite powerful in terms of using all the information. All right, so that's one huge feature. I just want to talk about SUNY Erie a little bit and my experiences. Well, first of all, this is SUNY Erie as a demographic to see if it matches your colleges, or, it's nice to know what the demographics are. We're located all the way on the western end of the state, and we have 3 campuses notated by these red little callouts. And you can see that if you know the area, I am actually located right now, I teach at the city campus, so I'm in an urban setting. But the Williamsville and the Orchard Park settings are actually in suburban areas, so quite a different population group. This is the number of students enrolled in math courses. So in our fall 2008 enrollment, we had about 10,500 students, and that's down about 20% from our peak about 5 years ago. And you can see the number of students in the different campuses. And City and South Campus have about equal number, and then North is about double. They're the campus where they do the major. This is just some information about our college as a whole and what our initiatives are. Again, I put this in here just as an FYI. If you want to look at this after I'm done more closely with the PowerPoint, basically what we did at our college was try to offer an incentive for professors to make the switch. And in order to do that, we gave them some money to help with, it was a MOU, to help with the conversion or the book review. But overall, here's the number of sections and the time frame. And if the cost comes in as $30 or less, even if it's published materials, we still would qualify because it's our affordable instructional materials. However, most of the people on this list are using OERs. How much savings has that been? So this is the savings from last year, and we're almost up to $600,000 this past year. And that doesn't even include summer yet. So how has it been working in our math sections? So at South Campus, contact hours sometimes are a little bit more than the credit hours, but essentially it qualifies as load for a professor. So what percentage of the contact hours are using OER or our AIM materials? And South Campus has nearly 2/3 of the sections now are all converted over to OER. Of that section, there are a couple professors using the Waymaker and the statistics. And then City Campus, we have some ups and downs here and there. I mean, it's not as a nice exponential growth curve as the South Campus. But what has happened was this drop here of the 47% just was because the classes that got canceled due to low enrollment typically were the OER sections or the AIM sections, and so we've lost some of those sections. So that kind of just some noise in the data. All right, so here are some other strategies we're using at ACC. I've mentioned some incentive monetarily for professors to actually convert over, and we're offering them a $1,500 stipend. That sunsets next year. We're going to try to renegotiate to see if the administration wants to start another MOU. Okay, and the last thing to help support faculty that are changing, I do lots of what these are called sandboxes at my campus. So we try to have these opportunities where professors can meet and come together and learn about the OER materials and Waymaker, because several of our psychology staff are using Waymaker for psychology, to try and get together and learn about what materials are out there. And so that has worked at our as a professional development opportunity at our campus. And then in our math department specifically, I started in fall 2013 with 3 sections, 2 sections of statistics and 1 calculus. And then Brian Millville did the, and I should have probably changed myself because I used his slide and I didn't realize it was in there, but Brian Millville did his work at South Campus starting in fall 2014. And just like to thank some of the people who were involved in all of this in the OER. Carnegie's OLI, again, was spearheading this back early on in the early fall 2013. David Lippman's creation of My Open Math, which is, he's in partnership or he's working with Lumen, and they have the online homework manager. And then Lumen Learning with their partnership that's continuing. I think they just signed something for 3 years, or that's coming up, that they're gonna continue the partnership with SUNY. Okay, and it is free for now, and let's hope that it's gonna continue for several more years before some of that cost gets pushed back to the college or even to the students. So how has Waymaker helped my students? And this has been pretty darn remarkable. Here's my STEM stats course, and the blue bars were prior to fall 2013, and then the orange bars are actually as I've been using the Waymaker curriculum. This is actually my online section. So this is how many online students I've had since fall 2013 in just my own sections. And if you notice, I mean, the students have been able to do the work much more readily. They're persisting, their passing rates have gone up, their fail rates have gone down, and the withdrawal rates have gone down. So this has been quite a remarkable change in my online stats course. And I just want to share with you briefly, if you can bear with me, a story with my colleague, because she also took and used Waymaker statistics. So back in fall of 2013, when I found the OLI statistics course, I had found that in June, and I read the whole book, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is better than any book review that I have done in the past 5 years. This is exactly the way I would like to teach statistics. And it's based on the GAZE reports that were posted, the 2005 at that point. So my colleague, Lynn Mislinski, was retiring in 3 years. She had just been department chair. I became department chair. And I kind of just sent her a text or an email and just said, you might want to take a look at the stats. I think I'm going to pilot this in the fall because it really is good. And she replies back to me initially and says, Dave, I'm retiring in 3 years. I'm not going to revamp my whole stats course for 3 semesters. I'm sorry, 3 semesters, not 3 years. I'm retiring in 3 semesters. So I get a phone call 2 weeks later, and she goes, Dave, we need to get together. And oh, by the way, I hate you. You just made my summer that much more busy. Because she says, if I don't teach using this content, I will not be able to sleep at night. She says, I know I'm not doing a service to my students, knowing what I know by you sharing this with me and having 3 semesters left. So we actually spent the summer working, converting our courses. And it was a huge success. Just as a side note, I'm using OER through the online homework manager, which was my open math and calculus. This product was much better, and the priciness of the original work, and this is an online class again, the priciness of the original work that I was using, the published work, was nearly $200 just for the online access, and the help that was offered with it was horrendous. So when I converted over to this other online homework manager, again, huge success and huge improvement in my passing rates. All right, so just myself, how much money have I saved my students? And I estimate, again, the cost for that online calculus thing was nearly $220, and my cost in general for the students is about $120. So this is kind of like a range of savings for my students. And they had to buy it because I did online homeworks and online using their environment. So this wasn't something where, well, how many students are actually buying the book? I didn't offer the book. This is without the book. This is just the online access fees. Okay, so Waymaker, a deeper dive. What makes this special? You know, how is this a different environment? So here's a screenshot from one of my early sections for my spring semester. And you can see this is towards the bottom. There's some panels here. This is from my Blackboard view, and I'm going to show you that. I'll take you into my course and show you some of that, what that looks like. But one of the things that they offer with this package that you can just plug into Blackboard, you just upload it, you just contact, and I'll show you how to contact SUNY OER services to get access to all of this, is I had the average quiz grade for this unit, and I was initially perplexed by the numbers. One of the things this course does also embed is the growth mindset idea, and that you learn from your mistakes. And they really try to help students say, don't take the second attempt until you've actually gone back and reviewed the materials that you need to. And in fact, these tiles, which above here are content tiles, will change color on the bottom to show what questions they got wrong on the quiz so that the students can go back and study accordingly. Well, the first attempt was 79%, then the second attempt was 61%, and I thought, how is this not working? Why are they doing worse on the second attempt? And then it finally dawned on me, and maybe you figured it out well before I did. Students who did well on the first attempt never had to take a second attempt, and so their scores are averaged in here, whereas their great scores are not averaged in for the second attempt. And that's why it went down. But it is an opportunity for the students to take a second attempt quiz. The quizzes are not identical. They are randomized questions. So they can't just look back at their first attempt and say, oh, I'm just going to copy and paste or figure out what the answers are for the next attempt. They are randomized from a question pool. All right, the next thing is, this is the slide showing the content of the first unit. And they talk about types of statistical studies. And then what I can see here is this little pair of numbers in the bottom right-hand corner of each tile. What that shows me is the average number times, or what their average was of getting the questions correct that were embedded in the reading. These are the formative assessment results. That is not something I grade them on. That is something they do on their own. The second number is how they performed, or what percentage of those concept questions from sampling they got right on the quiz. So you can see for sampling, 82% of my students figured it out, did really well on sampling. 80% of my students did fine with types of statistical studies. But conducting experiments, maybe that's something I need to really work on with them a little more, because they only got 70% of those questions correct, or 70% of the students got those questions related to conducting experiments on the quiz. So the analytics here are pretty amazing in terms of how I can diagnose where my students are at. I am using this for my seeded non-STEM stats course, so I can go in to look to see afterwards you know, when I have a unit due, if I need to do any quick remediation based on these numbers. The other thing Waymaker does is it has built in a student feedback option, and you can modify the emails to say what you want. I include things like my office hours, tell them that you don't even have to come into my office hours. If you want to call my office phone, I mean, we could do a WebEx for some of my online students. I give them feedback when they take the quiz, and I do let them know that it's automatic, but I still get emails like this. So this was a feedback to one of the students, and this is a canned message, and it's basically telling Katrina she did an awesome job on the quiz, and you can set the threshold at which that email gets generated. I believe I set it for 85 or higher. And Katrina replies, thank you. She appreciated the shout out. I have another student who I said, you did an awesome job on the means quiz, but then she actually took a little bit more time to explain what was happening. She said, I admit that some of the questions were challenging, but at the end of this course, this course teaches a lot. Thank you. And I will recommend everyone I know to take statistics online with Professor Usinski. I thought that was a nice shout out. I don't often get all of that because people, you know, don't really like to take math, but at least this was a positive experience for the student, that even though she struggled initially, she figured out that she grew with knowledge from, hopefully with Waymaker and taking the quizzes. This is an email that would be sent to me, not to the student. So you can set it up to have these emails go to your inbox. Again, if you're doing a seated class or online class, this is helpful in terms of reaching out to students before it's too late. So this student, it's letting me know that she struggled on this quiz and only scored a 38%, and that maybe I should try to reach out to the student to try and figure out if she needs further help with the concepts. And I've done that. I've replied. I've sent an email to the student saying, I've noticed you didn't do as well as you probably would have liked on that quiz. Is there anything I can do to help? Most times, the students will admit that, oh, I waited to the last minute to submit your work, and therefore I was ill prepared to take it. But I'll keep that in mind that you're offering to help. And then finally, this is an email that would go to a student that, well, if the student didn't perform well on the first attempt, it's trying to prevent them from opening the second attempt immediately and jumping in there to get some, to take that second attempt without taking the time to really learn from their mistakes. And so the student actually says, yes, I did know about the second attempt, and I plan to retake it soon, thank you. So that was clever that they didn't take the second attempt immediately. All right, so at this point, I wanted to show some of the other things that are built into what it looks like in terms of the Waymaker interface and the pages and the sections. So I wanted to go over just some of the embedded simulations in the reading, things you can't do in a static textbook. And so since they're already reading online, and I know that this has been quite a transition in the last 12 years. I've been teaching at ECC for 12 years. And I would say over the past 4 to 5 years, most students actually prefer to read on their phones. And I know that's hard for us as what do we want to call ourselves? We're digital immigrants, that to read something on a device, but students are comfortable with it now. So these are embedded simulations in their online textbook. So let me try a couple of them. I highlighted some that were my favorites. So one of the things they learned early on in module, this is module 1, this is my first unit in the course, is random assignment. And they go through this example of looking at hernia operations and the recovery. And one of them is laparoscopic and the other one is traditional. And so they first had to assign, there we go. They first had to assign the participants of this experiment into 2 groups. So they have to do it randomly. And if you look, this is how the reading looks to the student. So conducting experiments, they would read a little bit. There's a nice example, another example of random assignment, and now they can work with the simulation. And through the simulation, they click the button, and they can see that the average year, so this is how old the student is, or how old the patient is. The average age of the patient is 8.29 years. And then here are the 2 groups to receive each treatment. Okay, so treatment 1 are the red, treatment blue are the blue dots. So if I do random assignment, and I could use this again later in the course when I'm teaching difference of 2 means, if I want to do multiple samples. but it's really showing them that by random assignment, I'm trying to have both groups be uniform in terms of their average age so that I don't have any bias with age in there. Here's one of the questions and that would follow this where they would interact. This one is not graded because it's an open response. The goal of random assignment is to create similar groups. Does random assignment work and how do you know? So if I were to type something in here based on the simulation and ... So then I can check my answer. So they give an answer below, and I'm hoping that students, even if they don't fully answer the question here, are actually reading what the appropriate response is, what Waymaker has suggested as a good response. And then they go, what's the main point? Learn by doing. They have some more. They have another example. This one's pretty clever. I bring this one up in class about rats trying to learn a maze and listening to different types of music or silence. And yeah, so you can see what happens with their learning ability. And again, they can write their answer here. There's another learn by doing, and these are the ones they're keeping track of in terms of the percentage correct. What are explanatory variables? And so let's say after reading this, I don't know if that's the correct answer. Nope, it's not. They actually get immediate feedback as to why their answer was wrong and then shows the correct answer. So it's giving them feedback as they're reading to try and help solidify the concepts that they're reading about. And this is one page, and then you would go to the next page to do the next part. All right, so let me try another simulation. I thought early on in the class, I have students do descriptive statistics. And so doing histograms, they often ask, well, how many bars should we use? How many bins should we have? And I thought this applet's really clever in terms of showing maybe even, I dare say, aesthetic appeal of a histogram. But they can actually switch the bin width with the slider, and they can see that if you have too many bins, it doesn't give a good shape. If you have too few bins, by making the bin width larger, again, we can't really determine a good shape. But if you get it just about right, where you have 7 to 8 bins or so, I guess 6 here would look good, you can get a good distribution. But they can see then by interacting with this what happens with histograms. All right. The correlation unit, of course, I don't know, as a math teacher, I love doing correlation and linear applications and whatnot. I find the correlation unit to be outstanding. And so it's early on in the course, so we're not doing hypothesis testing on the slope. We're just looking at the correlation of paired data. So one of the first ones they come across is to try and learn how R works. And so they can use the slider to see as they move it left and right, as you approach -1 and as you approach 1, what happens and how much scatter there is. So they can kind of get a handle on what would be considered a strong correlation versus a weak correlation. We don't include sample size here well, I mean, obviously see the number of dots, but as I said, we don't do hypothesis testing with that. All right, some of the other ones that I like, the scatter plot applet here. You can put the dots on the screen. Okay, so this is their another introduction to correlation, and all right, here we go. So they can actually add points to this, and I can say something like, well, I'm going to make a strong negative correlation, something like this, and then I'm going to add 1 point and switch it to a strong positive correlation. And so I try to show them what influential points do, and if you can't read that on your screen, it went from a -1 to a 0.88. By just putting one outlier. So I try to show them the impacts of outliers on data, where this outlier is influential in changing the direction. But if you have outliers near the rest of the data set, it just weakens it. This one strengthens it in the opposite direction. It didn't strengthen it because it was a -1, but it switches the direction of the correlation. All right, so that's pretty neat to show the students. I also have an activity that they do with that as well. Another one is like best fit line. So I kind of do like a little activity in class where I say, okay, who's going to get the lowest sum of the squares? So for this one, it teaches them with this applet, how am I going to adjust this line so that I can get the lowest sum of the squared errors? So you can turn on the residuals. You can also turn on the boxes, which I think are helpful. And then you can adjust their slope and y-intercept. And I find that many students, even though I know statisticians write the equation of a line not in mx plus b form, many students actually start recognizing the importance of mx plus b in defining scattered data. All right, so I'm going to change this to an 8. Let's make this a 0.6. Hit enter. And then the students can keep working with this to see when there's some of the squared errors is reaching a lower. If they want to kind of slide things around, they can use this. All right, and now my B, I'm going to make it go this way. And so they can slide things up and down now to try and minimize this. And then I try to ask the student, okay, tell me when you think you've got the best. And we try to record to see who the winner is in terms of having the best fit line. And I forget what the optimal answer was, but I think it's down here in the reading somewhere. This was early on in the semester, so that number has left my brain. Some other ones that I do then, there's more stuff with slope and y-intercept. So when I get to the law of large numbers, when we get to the probability units, I like this GeoGebra simulation that's embedded in the textbook. All right, so this one, I mean, if you're doing probability distributions with binomials, it works really well. So I have 4 coins, and we're going to look at the outcomes of heads. So I can just hit the play button, and this is doing 1 coin flip at a time. So as I do the play button, we can see how this is populating. And I try to ask the students before it even starts, what do you think this is going to look like? And you can hit pause at any time. We can change that to 10 flips and go a lot faster. Or actually, I think this is just 10 flips at a time. Then we look at, the other one I like to show is the heads and tails. So who's going to win with the heads and tails? And I try to show them that as you do things over the long run, the probability approaches the theoretical probability. I hope. Ooh, tails is winning. All right, but you could do this for, and you can see it does get a lot closer as it moves on. But this is an excellent visualization for students to see how the law of large numbers actually works. All right, and then let's see. One of the other things I really try to show my students is not all normal curves are created equal. I know we have the standard normal curve, but I wanted to show them that if you change the standard deviation, even though our static pictures of normal curves don't change, I wanted to show them that to maintain an area of 1, this has to be redistributed. And so that you end up with a different shape based on the number of standard deviations. Because they always see one normal curve in all their literature. You know, and it kind of looks like, where's my 1 here? Well, it's never that tall, but it kind of looks like that. So that's another one I like. Let's see here. Let's look at confidence intervals. So another one here, and hopefully you can download my PowerPoint and then just click on some of these to play around with them. What I like about this simulation with confidence intervals, it actually shows them the calculations. So if I generate a random sample of 100 students from a population of part-time college students where we know the population proportion is 60% female, what is that going to, how is my confidence interval going to capture that true population proportion? And I like the fact that it actually shows them all the calculations. It shows them the lower and upper limit and how they're calculating it. We're using a z-star of 2 just to keep it simple and not the 1.96. But this seems to work really well. And so I have the students click this button a number of times until they don't capture the 0.6. And so that they can see that even though we're using statistical methods, there are times, and once out of every 20 times, because this is a 95% confidence interval, you're going to miss the true proportion. And that really helps emphasize the idea of sampling variability. All right, and let's see here. And then when we convert over from Z distributions into T distributions, I do like this one because it gives them a visual that's dynamic of how the T distribution, I know this is common in every textbook, how to show a normal curve versus a T distribution. But what's interesting here is if I can change this probability here to 0.95, so we're doing a 95% interval, and then I want to show how does sample size, and well, of course, degrees of freedom, how does it impact how many what the t-score is. And so at 50, we're still at 2, but if I scroll down, you can see that this thing gets wider because of the variability of a sample size of 3, and we're using that sample standard deviation, we have to have at least 3 t-scores in order for us to justify the middle 95%. And then as you approach the 100, we're getting closer to that 1.96. So I like showing that to my students as well. Okay. So you have that link, or you have this slide where you can just run the show, or if you are running it, not running the show, if you hit control and then the link, you can go to all these different simulations. The next part I want to show, though, is how do you get this information? So this is the website, oer.suny.edu, and let me take you there. Let me see, I'm going to go back to a simulation. It'll open up my web browser without exiting the show. All right, so let me go to oer.suny.edu. So if you're interested in exploring what is available for different content areas, we go to mathematics, and underneath here it shows us all the math that's available. Now you see OHM, those are basically the online homework manager where you have algorithmically generated questions. I use that for calculus, as I mentioned earlier. But for statistics, you have your option. So I know some professors, prefer when they do a change that it's pretty close to what they've already been teaching, depending on the publisher and the author that they're using. This book is pretty popular, the Kozak book, in terms of if you want to convert over. The book is on OpenStax through Rice University, and you can get a printed textbook for that. But I use this one. So if you wanted to explore this further, if you click on this, it allows you to try the course or view the content in the course, and I guess I'm on this page as well. But if you wanted to explore what the statistics, and they're calling it Statistics OLI because that's where it came from initially, you can do this. Now, if you say, hey, I'd like to try this in a Blackboard shell, and maybe your institution or Candela, I don't know if you guys use Candela or Blackboard, but if you want to try it in like a fake class just to see how it imports and everything, what you would do is you'd fill out this contact, you'd click this contact button, fill out all this information about what you want, your discipline, and someone will get back to you pretty darn quickly, and they'll give you a zip file that you can then import into your Blackboard shell that you can deploy. So what does my Blackboard course look like? Let me show you that in my remaining minutes here so you can see what it's from a student perspective. So I'll take you into my online course. As you can see, I have a lot of courses where I'm not a co-teacher, but we share our resources. So we have other instructors that we share our resources with for those teaching it the first time. All right, so in my course, here is where the students are, and I've put announcements, and they've gotten a little long. I better delete some of them. So a student would go, let's say, into week 4, and I have a discussion. Then they would go into the content area, and inside of this folder are several different assignments that I would actually collect from them and have to hand grade. There is this thing called the Stat Tutor Lab that's also like an interactive, more interactive recipe, like step-by-step that's inside of Waymaker. So if they're gonna go to reading, they would click this to begin reading. And this is what they see from right inside my Blackboard course. So they're launched over there. And it first starts off with why it matters and show what you know. So the show what you know is like a preliminary pre-quiz, and then so they have a post-test, obviously your quiz at the end. Most students really don't know much about statistics, so they don't perform that well on that pre-quiz. And then you've got scatter plots, linear relationships, association versus causation. So if you wanted to say, well, let me click on this and see how they're doing. And you can see some of the students, their formative versus their summative. Their summative is their quiz average on those questions. I can go in here. And this is how the students would progress reading through the course. All right, so there's the first learning objective. And then here we go. We dive into the vocabulary. And I love the fact that this book uses so many examples. I mean, they're just like little stories that seem to help students figure things out. And this, of course, is a pretty famous one. The number of firefighters at a fire and the number of damage So obviously the firefighters are causing the damage. Obviously not, but. And then you can see all the learn by doing that's built in, and the students would work through it, then go to the next page, and they continue working through it. And when they're done, and we go back to here, they will take I have a different thing here. I have a unit 4 homework, and this is basically, I'm using the OHM questions for more drill and practice type questions. So the students can access the homework, and I start off with saying this is again algorithmically generated, so the students can't really copy homework, but they can print a version, and then they can come back to a computer and put the work in. But obviously in this case, you would use technology, and to answer this question, you can just copy and paste this material into Minitab or into Excel to get your correlation coefficient. So this is actually to help them with some of the skills of the concepts in this. And then the rest of this are basically some videos I had put together. Here are some things that do come with Waymaker. How to do a scatter plot. They look at weights of adults, and then they have them separate them by males and females. And you can see different trends in the data. This one's pretty clever because it actually shows I think the gestation period for an elephant is 400 days or something, and it's an outlier versus how long they live. And so what happens if you include that outlier or not? And it turns out to be an influential one, so it actually improves the correlation coefficient. And then we got linear regression, and this looks at the Olympics. So what I've done is I've actually updated some of these. I know this is my online course now, but for the summer, I'll be updating these to have more current data. But it's basically the 1,500-meter race and how the times have gone down as time has gone on. And we look at a model to try and predict what's going to happen in the future. Students can then choose which type of statistical software they want to use to do this problem. So if you're teaching this with R, there's R directions or StatCrunch. We use Minitab at SUNY Erie. We have a site license for it, so the students have access to it. They can click Minitab, which will take them to another page with some directions. And they can download the file, and then here are the directions on how they're going to perform that assignment. All right. So let's see here. I think I've covered most of the things in the course and what it looks like. Again, what's nice is it's seamless, and students just have to click just stay within Blackboard to do all the work. And the quiz grades that are generated, let me show you what a quiz looks like. Oh, I can't show you what a quiz looks like. Never mind. I'll break FERPA because I'm as an instructor, so you'll see manage attempts, which isn't going to be good. Oh, maybe I can't wait. Let me do it this way. So there's ways, of course, you can, okay, I can start the quiz. There we go. So here is the quiz for this, and it's 10 questions. And if I were to do it once, I'd have these questions, and then students can review what they did wrong. And if you do it again, they are presented with a new set of questions, and so forth. All right. So let's go back to the PowerPoint. And I see that I'm coming up to 12:50, so here is just some more information from Lumen. This is, they're trying to get to the next generation of OERs by looking at Waymaker and other formats like this. So, and this is the cost. This is the cost they charge people, or charge institutions or students outside of New York State as we're under the grant. And then finally, here's my contact information, my email address, usinski@ecc.edu. I'd be happy to share with you any growing pains or what has happened along the way. I'm presenting, and I have to admit, there hasn't been many. The growing pains were more or less just trying to have it converted over from the OLI to the Waymaker, because the OLI was starting to charge $20 per student, but there was no mechanism for students to use financial aid. And so the solution that presented itself with Lumen and SUNY was highly beneficial, so that students, if they needed to use financial aid in the future or when they needed to use it, it's possible. But that seems to be irrelevant, as our institution has promised free access for students in the future. And we have the SUNY grant right now. All right, so any questions?
Please feel free to put your questions into the chat for Dave. Dave, I have a question about the financial aid. How did they work that out with the new system then, that the $20 was paid was?
So in other states, what they've done is students would have access from day one, and Lumen has worked with Follett, and I'm not sure how they've worked with Barnes & Noble, whoever your local campus bookstore vendors are, but they've actually developed somewhat of a partnership with Follett, and students will all have access from day one. And what happens is those institutions are using, they're calling them OER fees. So the students are paying like an OER fee up front with their tuition, which of course is covered by financial aid. And then what happens is the bookstore will take a look at how many students signed into the course and then just invoice the school for that fee to pay that amount. In New York State, we don't have to worry about that because that invoice is taken care of behind the scenes by the grant and through SUNY OER.
That's great. Okay, thank you. There is a question though there by Kelly. Can you see it or would you like me to read it?
Oh, so do I have, to be honest, not at all. I know I gave you a whirlwind looking at all my different assignments and everything, but I have got videos embedded throughout. So the students, I have an introduction video as to where they should start and where they should begin, how they should progress through the course. And then for any assignment that I have listed, I have a video as to exactly how they should upload it, what I'm expecting in terms of answers to questions. And I'm kind of embarrassed to admit this. For my stats course this semester, I want to say I've gotten less than 10 emails asking me how to do stuff or even conceptual questions. I just can't explain it, but it seems that whatever I've done in my class is working. Now, obviously, I've been teaching this for several years and several semesters. So every time that students, like if I have a common question that's being posed, I try to address it with a video in the right spot, so just in time. So I don't have them watch all the videos up front. They watch the videos as the next assignment is due. And that has helped immensely. I think just doing these small little videos, and if I use something called, I think it's ScreenCorder, it's just a web-based file, and then, or a web-based application, and then I can record up to 5 minutes, I think it is, and then I just publish it to YouTube, and then I put the link into the course.
And another question from Keith.
Oh, so I see that. That's a good question. Surprisingly, I have assignments due on a weekly basis, and you would think that there'd be students that would like try to really work ahead and try to finish. I don't have that. They actually stay on pace almost every week. Once in a great while, I will say it's maybe 1%, no, maybe 2%. Let's say 2% of all my students. Some of them may actually work ahead because I have the assignments open, but they do not. They kind of, if you ever look at Rate My Professor, one of my dings on Rate My Professor is the amount of work I give. So maybe it's just that they don't have the time to really work ahead. I don't know. So yeah, so it seems like it really does work well. And my calculus course as well. I went from receiving probably 20 to 30 questions a week and really working with students on how to do some of the questions step by step. When I converted over to the OM or the OER in my open math, those questions have minimized. Again, I think I have less than, in calculus, I think I have less than 20 questions. And most of the questions I have in calculus is, could you please check my answer? I think I put it in right, but I must have done something wrong. And that's it. That's 20 questions out of the whole semester. So sometimes I feel a little lonely teaching those online classes, but I do the discussions. I interact with the discussions, so the students know I'm there. But as for content questions, I can't believe how this thing kind of runs itself.
That's encouraging.
But I just hope it never becomes totally automated. Then we replace us.
So does anybody else have questions for Dave? Otherwise, we'll go ahead and let people resume their days. I'll get the recording ready for release. And thank you to Dave for presenting and to John for organizing all of these webinars. I think they've been very, very informative.
All right.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Dave.
Jamie, do I have to actually do the stop share?
No, when I close it, it'll stop. So don't worry.
Okay.
But you certainly can.
Okay, sounds good.